The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawns of Windsor Castle as Kate Middleton adjusted her navy blue dress one final time. Today was not just another royal engagement. Today would mark a turning point that none of them could have predicted. She stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers, her reflection showing a woman who had grown from a commoner into one of the most beloved members of the royal family. William had left early for his military duties. Kissing her forehead and promising to return before the evening's formal dinner, the dinner that would bring together the entire royal family, including Charles and Camilla, Kate's stomach tightened at the thought. The relationship between herself and her father-in-law had always been cordial, respectful even, but there had been moments lately where she sensed something shifting in the dynamics of the family. Camilla, the queen consort, had been particularly distant recently. Kate noticed it during their last public appearance together at a charity event for children's literacy. Where once there had been warm smiles and genuine conversation, now there seemed to be measured responses and careful positioning for photographs. Kate wondered if she had done something wrong, if perhaps her growing popularity with the public had somehow created an unspoken tension. The morning passed quietly as Kate reviewed her schedule with her private secretary. There were upcoming engagements to discuss, charitable patronages that needed her attention, and the constant stream of requests for her presence at various events. Being the Princess of Wales came with responsibilities she had never fully imagined when she first met William at university. Every word she spoke was analyzed, every gesture photographed and interpreted by the media and the public. As noon approached, Kate decided to take a walk through the castle gardens. The crisp autumn air felt refreshing against her skin, and the solitude gave her time to think. She found herself reflecting on her journey from Kate Middleton, daughter of middle-class parents who ran a party supply business, to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The transformation had been gradual but profound, and she sometimes wondered if she had lost pieces of herself along the way. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, Carol Middleton, asking about the children and when they might next visit Bucklebury. Kate smiled, thinking of George, Charlotte, and Louis, who were currently at school and blissfully unaware of the complex adult dynamics that surrounded their family. Their innocence was something she fiercely protected, remembering all too well the media scrutiny that had surrounded William and Harry during their own childhood. The afternoon brought meetings with various palace staff members and representatives from her charitable organizations. Kate had thrown herself into her royal duties with genuine passion, particularly focusing on early childhood development and mental health awareness. These causes spoke to her heart, and she found real purpose in using her platform to make a difference. The work gave her a sense of identity beyond just being William's wife or the future queen. As evening approached, Kate began preparing for the dinner that would bring the family together. Her lady-in-waiting helped her select the elegant emerald dress that had been a gift from the queen during the early days of her marriage. The dress held special meaning, representing acceptance and belonging within the royal family. Tonight, she hoped it would serve as a reminder of the bonds that connected them all. Charles arrived at the castle just as the sun was setting, his car pulling through the gates with the usual security escort. From her window, Kate watched as he emerged, looking distinguished in his evening wear but carrying himself with what seemed like a heavier burden than usual. She had noticed changes in him since becoming king, the weight of the crown manifesting in subtle ways that perhaps only those closest to him could see. Camilla's arrival followed shortly after, her car sweeping up the drive with practiced precision. Kate observed her step out with her usual grace, but there was something different in her posture, a stiffness that suggested she too was feeling the undercurrents of change within the family. Kate wondered what conversations had taken place between Charles and Camilla in private, what concerns or conflicts might be brewing beneath the surface of their public unity. The pre-dinner reception began in the blue drawing room, where family members gathered for cocktails and conversation before the formal meal. Kate entered to find Charles already deep in conversation with several courtiers, his face animated as he discussed some matter of state importance. When he saw her, his expression shifted, becoming warmer and more personal. He excused himself from the group and walked directly toward her. "Catherine, my dear," he said, taking her hands in his traditional greeting. But instead of the brief, formal contact that usually characterized their interactions, he held her hands longer, his grip firm and meaningful. "You look absolutely radiant tonight. That dress is particularly becoming on you." Kate felt a flutter of surprise at the warmth in his voice and the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you, Charles." "You're very kind," she replied, using the informal address he had always encouraged her to use in private family settings. She noticed that his eyes seemed to be searching her face, as if he were looking for something or trying to communicate something beyond his words. "I've been meaning to tell you," Charles continued, still holding her hands, "how impressed I've been with your recent work with the Early Childhood Foundation. Your speech at the symposium last month was truly exceptional. You spoke with such passion and knowledge. It reminded me very much of Diana's approach to her charitable work." The mention of Diana caught Kate off guard. Charles rarely spoke about his first wife, particularly not in such personal terms. Kate felt her cheeks flush slightly, both from the compliment and from the unexpected comparison. "I find the work incredibly fulfilling," she managed to say. "The research on early childhood development is so compelling. And if we can make even a small difference in children's lives—" "You're making far more than a small difference," Charles interrupted, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised her. "You have a natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel seen and heard. It's a rare gift, and one that this family needs now more than ever." Across the room, Kate became aware of Camilla's presence, though she hadn't seen her enter. When she glanced over, she found Camilla standing near the fireplace, watching their interaction with an expression that Kate couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes that looked almost like concern or perhaps disappointment. Kate felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the room. Charles seemed oblivious to his wife's watchful gaze as he continued his conversation with Kate, his attention completely focused on her. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the room, away from the other guests and courtiers who were mingling with their usual reserved chatter. Kate felt increasingly uncomfortable with the intensity of his attention, especially knowing that Camilla was observing them. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you," Charles said in a lower voice, ensuring their conversation remained private, "about the future of the monarchy and the role I see you playing in it." His words carried a weight that made Kate's pulse quicken. She had always known that her position as the future queen consort would eventually require deeper involvement in royal strategy and decision-making, but she hadn't expected such a conversation tonight. "I'm listening," Kate replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing unease about the situation. Charles glanced around the room briefly before continuing. "The monarchy is at a critical juncture, Catherine. Public opinion polls show that support for the institution varies dramatically across different demographics and regions. The younger generation, in particular, questions the relevance of the royal family in modern Britain. But you," he paused, looking directly into her eyes, "you represent something different. Something fresh and relatable that resonates with people in ways that perhaps the rest of us cannot." Kate felt overwhelmed by the implications of his words. She had always tried to fulfill her royal duties with dignity and authenticity, but she had never considered herself as someone who could single-handedly influence the future of the monarchy. "Charles, I appreciate your confidence in me, but surely these are conversations that should involve William and the entire family." "William is a good man and will be a fine king," Charles interrupted gently, "but he lacks your intuitive understanding of what people need from their royal family. You have something that cannot be taught or learned through protocol lessons. You have genuine empathy and an ability to make people feel that their concerns matter." As he spoke, Kate became increasingly aware of the growing tension in the room. Other family members had begun to arrive, and she could see Camilla approaching them with measured steps. Her face wore a polite smile, but Kate recognized the tightness around her eyes that suggested controlled frustration. "Charles." "Dear," Camilla said as she reached them, her voice carrying its usual warmth but with an underlying edge that only those who knew her well would detect. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." She positioned herself slightly between Charles and Kate, a subtle but deliberate movement that Kate noticed immediately. "Not at all, my darling," Charles replied, though he didn't step back from Kate or change his attentive posture. "I was just telling Catherine about some of the exciting developments with the Early Childhood Initiative. Her work is garnering international attention in ways that could be tremendously beneficial for Britain's soft diplomacy efforts." Camilla's smile remained fixed, but Kate caught a flash of something sharper in her expression. "How wonderful," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Though I do hope we're not overwhelming our dear Catherine with too many responsibilities too quickly. She already has such a full plate with the children and her existing commitments." Kate felt caught between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "I'm grateful for both of your support," she said diplomatically. "The work is challenging but rewarding, and I'm always learning from both of you about how to balance personal passion with royal duty." "You're being far too modest," Charles said, his voice carrying more enthusiasm than Kate was comfortable with given the circumstances. "Your instincts are exceptional, and I believe the family would benefit enormously from involving you more directly in strategic decisions about our future direction." The suggestion hung in the air between them, and Kate felt the weight of its implications. Camilla's expression became more guarded, and Kate realized that this conversation was touching on issues of hierarchy and influence within the royal family that she had never considered. As queen consort, Camilla held a specific position and set of responsibilities, and Charles's suggestion seemed to be proposing something that could potentially alter those dynamics. "That's very generous of you to suggest," Kate replied carefully. "But I think any such discussions should involve all the senior members of the family. William should certainly be part of any conversations about future strategic directions." Before Charles could respond, the butler announced that dinner was served. The timing felt like a relief to Kate, who was grateful for the interruption of what had become an increasingly complex conversation. As they moved toward the dining room, she found herself walking between Charles and Camilla. Acutely aware of the tension between the couple, the formal dining room had been set with the finest china and crystal, creating an atmosphere of elegance and tradition that Kate normally found comforting. Tonight, however, the grandeur felt oppressive. She took her assigned seat, noting that Charles had arranged for her to be positioned closer to him than usual, while Camilla sat across the table where she could observe all interactions. Throughout the first course, conversation remained light and general, touching on upcoming royal engagements, family news, and current events. Kate participated naturally in the discussion, but she remained hyper-aware of the dynamics between Charles and Camilla. She noticed that Camilla's contributions to the conversation became more frequent and pointed whenever Charles directed attention toward Kate. When the topic turned to upcoming state visits and diplomatic obligations, Charles once again focused his attention on Kate's perspectives and insights. Catherine's recent visit to the Children's Hospital in Manchester generated tremendous positive coverage, not just domestically but internationally, he said, addressing the table but looking primarily at Kate. The photographs of her genuinely engaging with the children showed a side of the royal family that people rarely see. Kate has always been wonderful with children, Camilla added, her tone pleasant but carrying a subtle emphasis on the word always that suggested she wanted to remind everyone that Kate's positive qualities were not a recent discovery. It's one of the many reasons why she's been such a perfect fit for our family. Kate sensed that Camilla was trying to assert some form of territorial claim over their relationship, establishing herself as someone who had recognized and appreciated Kate's qualities long before Charles's current enthusiasm. She felt increasingly uncomfortable being the focus of what seemed to be an indirect competition between husband and wife. "I've been fortunate to have guidance from both of you," Kate said, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Learning to balance authenticity with royal protocol has been an ongoing process. and I've benefited enormously from observing how both of you handle different situations. Charles leaned forward slightly, his eyes bright with interest. But you bring something unique to that balance, Catherine. You haven't been constrained by decades of traditional thinking about what royal engagement should look like. Your approach feels more natural, more connected to how people actually live their lives today. The compliment was generous, but Kate noticed that it implicitly criticized more traditional approaches to royal duty, which would certainly include Camilla's methods. She saw Camilla's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and realized that Charles's praise of her was creating an uncomfortable comparison between his wife's approach and her own. As the evening progressed, the tension in the dining room became increasingly palpable. Other family members present began to notice the undercurrents of the conversation between Charles. Camilla and Kate, Princess Anne, always astute in her observations of family dynamics, watched the interaction with raised eyebrows. Edward and Sophie exchanged glances that suggested they too were picking up on the uncomfortable atmosphere. Charles seemed completely unaware of the effect his words were having on his wife. Or perhaps he was choosing to ignore it. His focus remained intensely fixed on Kate, asking for her opinions on everything from environmental initiatives to Commonwealth relations. Each question and comment seemed designed to highlight her intelligence and insight, but also served to position her as his primary confidant on matters of royal strategy. "I've been thinking," Charles said as the main course was served, "that Catherine should take on a more prominent role in the upcoming Commonwealth Summit. Her perspective on youth engagement could be invaluable in addressing some of the challenges we're facing with younger generations across the Commonwealth nations." Camilla sat down, her fork with perhaps more force than necessary. "That's an interesting suggestion, dear," she said, her voice maintaining its pleasant tone despite the obvious effort required, "though I believe we should be careful not to overshadow the established protocols for such events. There are reasons why certain roles have been traditionally assigned based on seniority and experience." Kate felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She hadn't asked for increased responsibilities or prominence, and she certainly hadn't intended to create conflict between Charles and Camilla. "I think Camilla raises important points," she said quickly. "I'm still learning about Commonwealth relationships, and I would benefit enormously from observing and assisting rather than taking on prominent roles before I'm ready." "Nonsense," Charles replied with surprising firmness. "You underestimate your own capabilities, Catherine. Some of the most effective royal engagements in recent years have been those where you've been allowed to follow your instincts rather than rigid protocols." He turned to address the table generally, but his words seemed particularly directed at Camilla. "Sometimes fresh perspectives are exactly what we need to remain relevant and effective." The word relevant seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. Kate watched as Camilla's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing hurt and anger beneath her practiced royal demeanor. She quickly recovered, but not before Kate had seen the impact of Charles's words, "Princess," and chose that moment to intervene with characteristic directness. "Perhaps," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "we might consider that effectiveness comes from working as a team rather than highlighting individual contributions. The strength of the monarchy has always been in its unity and shared commitment to service." Charles looked momentarily taken aback by his sister's comment, as if he hadn't realized how his praise of Kate might be perceived by others at the table. Kate felt grateful for Anne's intervention, but also increasingly aware that she had somehow become the center of a conflict she neither understood nor wanted any part of. "Of course," Charles said, his tone becoming more measured. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I simply believe that we should make full use of all the talents within our family." He glanced at Camilla with what appeared to be an attempt at a reassuring smile. Camilla's experience and wisdom remain invaluable, naturally, but the damage had been done. Kate could see that Camilla was struggling to maintain her composure, and she felt terrible about being the unwitting cause of the conflict. She tried to redirect the conversation toward safer topics, asking about upcoming cultural events and charity galas, but the atmosphere remained strained as dessert was served. Kate noticed that Charles continued to focus his attention primarily on her, asking about her children's schools, her thoughts on various social issues, and her plans for future charitable initiatives. With each question, she could feel Camilla's growing isolation from the conversation. It was as if Charles was unconsciously excluding his wife in favor of his daughter-in-law, creating a dynamic that felt both inappropriate and deeply uncomfortable. When the formal dinner concluded and the family moved to the drawing room for coffee and liqueurs, Kate hoped the change of setting might ease the tension. Instead, Charles immediately approached her again, continuing their earlier conversation about her potential expanded role in royal duties. "I've been speaking with the Prime Minister's office about your work," he told her in what he probably thought was a private voice, though others in the room could certainly hear. "They're tremendously impressed with your approach to social issues and believe you could be instrumental in some upcoming policy initiatives." Kate felt overwhelmed by the implications of his words. Being involved in policy discussions was far beyond what she had ever imagined for her role, and she knew that such involvement would require careful coordination with other senior royals. "That's very flattering," she replied. "But surely such discussions should involve William from the beginning. And of course Camilla's experience in these areas would be invaluable." "William will be involved, naturally," Charles said dismissively, "but you have insights that are uniquely valuable." And as for Camilla, he glanced toward his wife, who was standing across the room engaged in stilted conversation with Edward and Sophie. "Her strengths lie in other areas." The casual dismissal of his wife's capabilities shocked Kate. She had always respected Camilla's dedication to her royal duties and her particular expertise in areas like literacy and domestic violence support. To hear Charles minimize those contributions felt wrong and deeply unfair. "Charles," Kate said, her voice lower but firmer than before, "I think you may be overestimating my abilities and undervaluing others who have been serving the crown much longer than I have. I'm honored by your confidence, but I don't feel comfortable with suggestions that seem to bypass established hierarchies and relationships." For the first time that evening, Charles seemed to truly hear what she was saying. His expression shifted as she saw a flicker of recognition cross his face. He glanced toward Camilla, who was now standing alone by the fireplace, her isolation in the room painfully obvious despite the presence of other family members. "I see what you mean," he said quietly. And Kate felt a wave of relief that perhaps the evening's uncomfortable dynamics might finally be addressed. But before Charles could take any action to remedy the situation, an unexpected interruption changed the course of the evening entirely. A private secretary entered the room with an urgent message that required Charles's immediate attention. As he was called away to handle what appeared to be a significant matter of state, Kate found herself alone with the rest of the family, including Camilla, who had been left to process the evening's events without any resolution or acknowledgement from her husband. Kate watched as Camilla maintained her composure despite what had clearly been a hurtful and embarrassing evening. She felt compelled to approach her, to somehow address what had happened. But she wasn't sure what she could say that wouldn't make the situation worse. The room felt charged with unspoken tension as family members began to make polite excuses to leave early. Kate realized that what had started as a routine family dinner had become something much more significant and problematic. The evening had revealed fractures in relationships and dynamics that she had never suspected, and she found herself questioning her own role and position within the family structure. As the other family members began to drift away from the drawing room, making their polite excuses about early morning commitments and prior engagements, Kate found herself in an increasingly difficult position. Camilla remained by the fireplace, her posture elegant as always, but Kate could see the strain in her shoulders, and the carefully controlled expression that suggested she was fighting to maintain her composure. Kate approached slowly, uncertain of what she should say or whether her presence would be welcome. The evening had created a situation she had never experienced before within the royal family, and she felt completely unprepared to navigate the complex emotions and implications involved. Camilla, she said softly, coming to stand beside her stepmother-in-law. I hope you know that I never intended for tonight to become what it became. Camilla turned to look at her, and for the first time that evening, Kate saw her guard completely down. The hurt in her eyes was unmistakable, but there was also something else that surprised Kate. Something that looked almost like understanding or even sympathy. My dear Catherine, Camilla said, her voice tired but kind, none of this is your fault. You handled yourself with grace throughout what must have been a very uncomfortable evening for you as well. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Charles can sometimes become enthusiastic about people and ideas in ways that he doesn't realize might affect others. Kate felt a wave of relief at Camilla's generous response, but also a deepening concern about what the evening had revealed about the royal family dynamics. I don't understand what happened tonight, she admitted. I've never seen him behave that way before, and I certainly never encouraged it. Camilla smiled sadly. I know you didn't, dear. Charles has always had a tendency to become completely focused on whatever or whoever captures his imagination at any given moment. Usually it's a charitable cause or an environmental initiative. Tonight, it seems to have been you and your potential role in the monarchy. The explanation made sense to Kate, but it also raised troubling questions about what it meant for Camilla's position and their family relationships going forward. What do we do now? Kate asked. How do we move past this? Before Camilla could answer, they heard Charles's voice in the hallway as he returned from his urgent meeting. Both women straightened instinctively, preparing to resume their public personas despite the private conversation they had been having. Charles entered the room looking slightly frazzled from whatever crisis he had been called away to handle, but his face brightened immediately when he saw Kate and Camilla standing together. Kate noticed that he seemed oblivious to any tension or awkwardness, as if he had completely forgotten the dynamics of the evening. Ah, wonderful, he said, approaching them with renewed energy. I'm so glad you two are having a chance to talk. Catherine, I hope Camilla has been sharing some of her insights about managing the pressures of royal life. Her experience could be invaluable as we discuss expanding your role. Kate felt her stomach drop as she realized that Charles's brief absence had not provided him with any perspective on the evening's events. If anything, he seemed more determined than ever to pursue his vision of her increased involvement in royal affairs. Charles, Camilla said carefully, perhaps this isn't the best time to continue those discussions. It's been a long evening, and I think we all need time to reflect on what's been proposed. But Charles seemed energized rather than deterred. Actually, I think this is the perfect time, he said, moving to stand closer to Kate. The meeting I just had was about the upcoming G20 summit, and it confirmed my belief that Catherine's perspective on social issues could be tremendously valuable in our diplomatic efforts. Kate watched as Camilla's face closed down again, the brief moment of openness and connection they had shared disappearing behind her practiced royal mask. She realized that Charles's continued focus on her was not just creating momentary discomfort, but was actively damaging his relationship with his wife. Charles. Please, Kate said, her voice firmer than she had ever used with him before. I think we need to step back from these discussions. I'm not ready for the kind of expanded role you're suggesting, and I don't think it's appropriate to make such decisions without proper consultation with William and other senior family members. Charles looked surprised by her directness, but instead of backing down, he seemed to interpret her reluctance as modesty rather than genuine concern. Catherine, you're being far too humble, he said, reaching out to take her hand in what appeared to be a gesture of encouragement, the moment his fingers closed around hers. Kate felt the wrongness of the gesture in every fiber of her being. It wasn't just that the touch was inappropriate given the circumstances. It was the fact that he was choosing to make this physical connection with her while his wife stood just feet away, having been emotionally excluded from most of the evening's conversations. Charles? No, Kate said, trying to pull her hand away. But his grip tightened slightly, and she realized that he was so caught up in his vision of her potential that he wasn't reading her obvious discomfort. You have to trust me on this, he he continued, his eyes bright with conviction. I've been observing the monarchy's relationship with the public for decades, and I know what we need to remain relevant and effective. You represent something fresh and authentic that could revolutionize how people perceive the royal family. Kate looked desperately toward Camilla, hoping for some intervention or support, but what she saw in the other woman's eyes made her heart sink. Camilla was watching the scene with a mixture of pain and resignation that suggested this was not the first time she had found herself pushed aside in favor of someone who had captured Charles's intense attention. "Please let go of my hand," Kate said clearly, loud enough that there could be no mistaking her words or intention. The directness of her request seemed to finally penetrate Charles's enthusiasm, and he released her hand with a look of confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, though he seemed more puzzled than apologetic. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I was simply trying to emphasize how important I think your contributions could be." Kate stepped back, creating more physical distance between them, and looked directly at both Charles and Camilla. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about what I want and what would be appropriate for my role in the family," she said. "I'm committed to my royal duties, but I'm also committed to supporting the existing structure and hierarchy of the monarchy, which includes respecting the roles and contributions of everyone in this family." The words hung in the air, and Kate could see that Charles was beginning to understand that his behavior throughout the evening had been problematic. His gaze moved to Camilla, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see the impact his actions had had on his wife. Camilla stood perfectly still, her training and years of experience allowing her to maintain her dignity even in this moment of personal humiliation. But Kate could see the cost of that composure in the tightness around her eyes and the rigid control of her posture. "Camilla," Charles said, his voice suddenly uncertain, "I hope you understand that I never meant to ... "I understand perfectly," Camilla replied, her tone polite but distant. "I think it would be best if we all took some time to consider what's been discussed this evening. There's clearly much that needs to be thought through carefully." The formality of her response made it clear that damage had been done to their relationship, damage that wouldn't be easily repaired with simple apologies or explanations. The silence that followed Camilla's words was deafening. Kate watched as the full weight of the evening's events seemed to finally register with Charles. His face changed as he looked between his wife and daughter-in-law, perhaps seeing for the first time how his behavior had created an impossible situation for both women. "I think I should go," Kate said quietly, feeling that her continued presence was only making things worse for the couple who clearly needed to have their own private conversation about what had transpired. "No. Please don't leave on our account," Camilla said with characteristic grace, though Kate could hear the strain in her voice. "This is your home too, Catherine, and you've done nothing wrong." Charles finally seemed to find his voice. "Camilla is right," he said, though his tone had lost all of its earlier confidence and enthusiasm. "Catherine, please forgive me if I made you uncomfortable this evening. That was never my intention." Kate looked at both of them, these two people she had grown to care for deeply during her years as part of their family, and felt her heart break for the pain that had been caused. "There's nothing to forgive?" she said gently. "I think we all just need to take some time to process what's happened and figure out how to move forward." But as she spoke, Kate realized that the evening had fundamentally altered something in their relationships that couldn't simply be forgotten or glossed over. Charles had revealed preferences and intentions that would affect how they all interacted going forward. Camilla had been publicly diminished by her own husband in favor of another woman, even if that hadn't been his conscious intention. And Kate herself had been put in a position where she had become an unwilling source of conflict between a married couple. "Perhaps," Charles said hesitantly, "we could all sit down tomorrow and discuss this more calmly. I clearly haven't thought through all the implications of what I was suggesting, and I want to make sure everyone feels heard and valued." Camilla's response was swift and decisive. "I don't think that's necessary, Charles. I believe Catherine has made her feelings quite clear, and I respect her position completely. There's no need to rehash conversations that have already caused enough discomfort." Kate recognized that Camilla was protecting her from further uncomfortable discussions, but she also sensed that the older woman was protecting herself from more potential hurt. By shutting down future conversations about Kate's expanded role, Camilla was attempting to prevent similar situations from arising again. "I agree with Camilla," Kate said. "I think the best thing for everyone is to continue with our existing arrangements and responsibilities. I'm happy with my current role and have no desire to change our family dynamics." Charles looked deflated by their responses, and Kate could see that he was struggling to understand how his vision of progress and modernization had created such conflict. "I only wanted what was best for the monarchy," he said quietly. "I know," Kate replied with genuine sympathy. "And your dedication to the crown is admirable? But sometimes the best thing for the monarchy is stability and respect for the people who have been serving it faithfully for years." The pointed nature of her comment was not lost on any of them. She was essentially telling Charles that his treatment of Camilla had been unfair and damaging. Regardless of his intentions regarding Kate's future role, Camilla looked at Kate with something that might have been gratitude, though she was too dignified to express it openly. "I think I'll retire for the evening," she announced. "It's been quite a full day and I have early meetings tomorrow." As Camilla moved toward the door, Charles stepped forward as if to follow her or perhaps to say something more, but she held up a slight hand that somehow managed to be both polite and firmly discouraging. "Good night." "Catherine, dear," Camilla said, her voice warm despite the evening's events. "I hope you sleep well." "Good night, Camilla," Kate replied, wishing there were words that could somehow repair what had been broken after Camilla left. Charles remained in the drawing room with Kate, looking lost and confused. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed uncertain about his role and his relationships within his own family. "I've made a terrible mess of things, haven't I?" he asked, and Kate was struck by how vulnerable he sounded. "Not terrible," Kate said kindly, "but yes, there's damage that needs to be repaired. Camilla has been nothing but supportive and gracious to me since I joined this family, and she deserved better than what happened tonight." Charles nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. I got caught up in my ideas about the future and lost sight of the present. Camilla has been my rock through everything, and I've treated her terribly." Kate felt encouraged by his recognition of the problem, but she also knew that understanding the issue and fixing it were two different things. "It's not too late to make things right," she said, "but it will require more than just acknowledgement. Camilla needs to know that you value her contributions and that what happened tonight was an aberration, not a new pattern." "How do I do that?" Charles asked, and Kate was touched by his genuine desire to repair his relationship with his wife. "Start by remembering all the reasons you fell in love with her and chose to marry her," Kate suggested. "Remember her strengths, her wisdom, her dedication to the crown and to you personally. And then make sure those things are reflected in how you treat her publicly and privately." Charles was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing her words. "You're right, of course. Camilla has been extraordinary in her role as queen consort. She's handled the transition with dignity and grace, and she's never asked for recognition or praise for the sacrifices she's made." "Then make sure she knows you see and appreciate those things," Kate said. "And Charles, please understand that I never want to be in a position where my presence or my role creates problems in your marriage. That's not fair to any of us." "I understand," Charles replied, "and I want you to know that my high opinion of your capabilities doesn't diminish my respect for Camilla. I simply expressed myself poorly and created comparisons that were unfair and hurtful." Kate nodded, feeling hopeful that perhaps the damage from the evening could be repaired with time and effort. "I think we all care too much about each other and about the monarchy to let this permanently damage our relationships," she said. "I hope you're right," Charles said. "I need to find a way to show Camilla that she's my priority, not just as my wife, but as my partner in serving the crown." As Kate finally said goodnight and left Charles alone with his thoughts, she felt emotionally drained from the evening's events. The walk back to her own quarters gave her time to reflect on what had happened. and what it might mean for her future within the royal family. She realized that her position was more complex and potentially problematic than she had ever imagined, and that her actions and relationships could have consequences far beyond her own personal experience. 3 weeks had passed since that difficult evening at Windsor Castle, and Kate found herself carefully observing the dynamics within the royal family as they navigated the aftermath. The morning of the annual Children's Charity Gala presented the first major public appearance where she, Charles, and Camilla would all be present together since that uncomfortable dinner. Kate stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, choosing her outfit with more care than usual. She selected a modest pale blue dress that she knew photographed well but wouldn't draw excessive attention away from the event's charitable purpose. More importantly, she wanted to ensure that nothing about her appearance would overshadow Camilla, who as queen consort would naturally be the senior female royal at the event. William had returned from his military duties the day after the dinner, and Kate had struggled with whether to tell him about what had happened. She had ultimately decided to share the general outlines of the evening without going into details that might damage his relationship with his father. William had listened with growing concern and had assured her that she had handled the situation appropriately. "I'll speak with him," William had said. But Kate had asked him to wait and see how things developed naturally. She hoped that Charles would find his own way to repair the damage, without requiring intervention from his son. As her car approached the venue for the charity gala, Kate could see that photographers and reporters had already assembled in large numbers. The event always generated significant media coverage, but she suspected that today there would be particular attention paid to the interactions between the royal family members. The press had a way of sensing when there were underlying tensions, even when nothing was explicitly reported inside the venue. Kate was greeted by the event organizers and quickly briefed on the schedule and her specific role in the proceedings. She was grateful to have clear duties to focus on, as it would help her navigate any awkward moments with Charles and Camilla when Charles arrived. Kate watched from across the room as he was welcomed by the charity officials. She noticed that he seemed more subdued than usual, lacking his typical energy and enthusiasm for such events. When their eyes met across the room, he gave her a small, almost apologetic smile that confirmed he was still processing the events of that evening. Camilla's arrival created a subtle shift in the room's energy. She entered with her characteristic poise, greeting organizers and donors with genuine warmth, while maintaining the perfect balance of accessibility and dignity that had made her so effective in her royal role. Kate observed that several people approached Camilla specifically, clearly valuing her involvement and support for their cause. When the three of them were finally brought together for photographs and the formal opening remarks, Kate felt the tension that still existed beneath the surface. However, she was relieved to see that Charles seemed genuinely focused on supporting Camilla's prominence in the event rather than seeking to highlight Kate's role. The Queen Consort's leadership in children's literacy initiatives has been transformative, Charles said during his opening remarks, making direct eye contact with Camilla as he spoke. Her dedication to improving educational opportunities for disadvantaged children represents the very best of what the monarchy can contribute to our society. Kate felt a wave of relief at his words and saw Camilla's subtle but genuine smile in response. It appeared that Charles had taken their conversation to heart and was making conscious efforts to publicly affirm his wife's value and contributions. As the event progressed, Kate noticed other positive changes in Charles's behavior. When speaking with donors and charity officials, he consistently referenced Camilla's expertise and insights rather than dominating conversations. When photo opportunities arose, he ensured that Camilla was positioned prominently and seemed genuinely proud to showcase her involvement. The most telling moment came during an impromptu conversation with several young beneficiaries of the charity's programs. One child asked Charles about what made him most proud about the royal family's work. Kate watched as he immediately looked toward Camilla and spoke about her commitment to causes that might not receive public attention but made enormous differences in people's lives. The Queen Consort Visit schools and community centers, where there are no cameras and no press coverage, Charles explained to the children. She does it because she truly cares about helping people learn and succeed, not because anyone will read about it in the newspapers. Camilla's face showed genuine emotion at his words, and Kate realized that this kind of public recognition and appreciation was exactly what had been missing from their relationship dynamic. Charles had learned to see and articulate his wife's value in ways that honored her contributions rather than taking them for granted. When Kate's turn came to speak with the children, she was careful to direct their attention to both Charles and Camilla as examples of dedicated royal service. The king and queen consort have taught me so much about how to use the privilege of royal position to help others, she said. They show me every day what it means to serve with purpose and humility. Later, during a brief private moment while moving between events, Camilla approached Kate with an expression of gratitude and warmth that had been missing since before that difficult evening. Thank you, Camilla said simply. I know you spoke with Charles about what happened, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your wisdom and kindness in handling what was a very difficult situation for all of us. There's no need to thank me, Kate replied. I only want us all to be able to work together effectively and support each other. You've been nothing but generous to me since I joined this family, and I hope that never changes. Camilla smiled with genuine warmth. It won't change, my dear. If anything, I have even more respect for you after seeing how you handled Charles's enthusiasm. You showed remarkable maturity and judgment. I'm just glad we can move forward, Kate said. The royal family works best when we're all supporting each other rather than competing or creating divisions. Wise words, Camilla agreed. And I think Charles has learned that lesson as well. As the day concluded and they prepared to leave the venue, Kate observed the final interactions between Charles and Camilla. There was a tenderness in how he helped her with her coat and ensured she was comfortable before they departed. The easy partnership that had always characterized their relationship seemed to be returning. Stronger perhaps because they had weathered this challenge together. In her car ride back to Kensington Palace, Kate reflected on what she had learned from the experience. She realized that her position within the royal family carried responsibilities and potential consequences that extended far beyond her own actions and intentions. Every interaction, every relationship, every public appearance had the potential to affect the delicate balance of personalities and roles that kept the monarchy functioning effectively. She thought about the phone call she would make to William that evening, sharing the positive developments from the day and her relief that the family seemed to be healing from the temporary discord. Most importantly, she felt grateful that she had navigated her first real crisis within the royal family in a way that ultimately strengthened relationships rather than damaging them. Permanently, the experience had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of speaking up when situations felt wrong, even when it meant confronting someone she respected and cared about. It had also shown her that the royal family, despite all its protocols and traditions, was ultimately made up of human beings with complex emotions and relationships that required the same care and attention as any family. As her car pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace, Kate felt a sense of peace about her role and her relationships within the royal family. The crisis had passed, lessons had been learned, and the monarchy would continue to serve the British people with renewed unity and mutual respect among its members.